by Newcastle County.
Is Black history the new arena for racial tension in this country, or is it a partisan issue? Supporters say Black history is American history and should not be segregated. Delaware joins a growing number of states that have passed laws requiring additional Black history in our schools. LeGarrette King is an associate professor at the University of Missouri and founding director of the Carter Center for K-12 Black history education. His primary research examines how Black history is interpreted and taught in schools and society. Dr. King has seen an uptick in Black history lessons since the Trayvon Martin murder case. He's also seen a backlash. He believes the divide over how to teach American history, and specifically Black history, is growing wider.
For those states and school districts that would like to mandate, Black history, first we have to realize that there's a difference between the history of American racism versus Black history or any other racialized histories, right? Most of Black history curriculum in our schools starts with European contact or European colonization, right? Meaning that it starts with enslavement. Very rarely do we learn about Black people pre-enslavement, right? Most of Black history curriculum centers on what we like to call Black first, right? The first Black person to break into white society, right? And that negates all the historical relevance of Black people integration, right? Black history is centered on what I would call the triad of experiences, right? Slavery, the Civil War / Reconstruction, and the Civil Rights Movement, right? Those three eras dominate notions of Black history. And then also Black history, when it is taught, is primarily focused on Black males who are heterosexual, who are middle class, who are able-bodied, and Christian, right? And what we do is we miss out on the various different identities that make up Black communities that can really help us understand Black histories a little bit more deeper. A lot of these particular states do have these mandates, but they don't have any accountability for the school districts. They don't have any monies for professional development for the teachers or the creation of the courses. So that becomes very difficult to actually enact a law if there's no support. History is not about patriotism. History is not about loving or liking a country. History is about helping us understand our identity and helping to understand our humanity.
House Bill 198 requires each school district and charter school to establish and implement a curriculum on Black history for their students in grades K-12. The bill requires public school curriculum to add Black history lessons starting in the 2022 school year. The bill's sponsor, Representative Sherry Dorsey Walker, believes it is critical for students to see themselves in history, to understand what is possible for their future.
House Bill 198 focuses on adding Black history to the state's curriculum. And what ultimately ended up happening is there were those who wanted to hijack the legislation, and I use that word not lightly. Let's say this, in 2016, our state turned purple. Delaware has always been a solidly blue state. And after the 2016 election, the bottom half of our state turned red. And I don't necessarily want to turn this into a Democrat-Republican kind of issue because Republicans did vote for the legislation. Part of the issue became there are those who don't want to deal with the history of Delaware and the United States as it pertains to Black people. And if I can pretend like this didn't happen, or if I can continue with my life and not have to stop and deal with these issues, then we'll just keep on moving. And I think that's part and parcel of the conversation. And listening to the individuals at the 4-hour committee meeting, it was very interesting just hearing some of the conversation around what they thought Black history was.
And I'm sorry to cut you off.
Sure.
I'm very interested in that. What was the conversation? What were some of the things that you overheard in regards to that?
Oh, it wasn't overhearing. They stated it very clearly in the committee meeting. Well, a lot of it was nonsensical, and some of it is just not even worth repeating. And others were just kind of like, well, I don't want this forced on my children. Yet Black history is American history, and American history is taught in our schools. So what's the problem? The problem is, and we have to do a lot of reconciling in this country, and in particular in this state, the word Black is not bad. Black is beautiful, Black is love. But until people get beyond their own preconceived notions of what it is to be Black, or what the Black experience is
in
the United States.
Right.
Yes, we're not talking about any place else. We're talking about right here in the United States of America, the land of the free, the home of the brave. And if we're free and brave, then why do we have such a hard time talking about Black history?
People at home are concerned about whether or not their student, their child, would be brainwashed by this information, that it would be told that they are no good because they are Caucasian and they have this feeling. These are some of the things that I've read and some of the opposition that you have encountered. Could you tell us a little bit more about the opposition that you've encountered?
So this bill doesn't deal with critical race theory at all. It deals with adding Black history to the state's curriculum. And that is the narrative that tried to hijack this piece of legislation.
Okay.
So it's not anywhere in here, hence why Republicans ultimately voted for it, because they had an understanding both in the House and in the Senate that CRT is not even addressed in this bill. This bill deals specifically with adding Black history to the state's curriculum.
Now, isn't there already Black history in the state's curriculum?
Well, if you say that Rosa Parks, who sat on the bus and created the Montgomery bus boycott in conjunction with Dr. Martin Luther King, is a part of Black history, then absolutely it is. And she's a wonderful member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I thought I'd throw that in there. But also, at the end of the day, the bottom line is there's so much more to our history. And that is an important part of our history. But Delaware history, let's talk about how Black people could not go to the beaches, and the only beach that allowed Black people to come onto the beach was Lewis Beach. But that's a part of Delaware history. Hence why my husband and I love Lewis Beach, because I know my history. It was taught to me. How about that I represent a district where my parents, after my dad served this country proudly, during a time of war, came home and wanted to buy his lovely wife, my mother, a home, and was denied housing. That's called redlining. But we don't want to talk about those things. That's Black history. So nothing to do with CRT.
And some of that will be placed into the curriculum.
It absolutely should have been all along.
True.
Our children should have been learning the real history of this state and this nation so that we don't repeat it.
Representative Dorsey Walker was aided in the passage of 198 by two remarkable students. Listening to current students' perspectives helped ensure that the curriculum laid out in the bill was modern. One of those students was Tyler Bush, graduate of Mount Pleasant High School, currently attending the University of Virginia. He says that Black history is much deeper than just slavery. You work directly with Representative Sherry Dorsey Walker in regards to crafting this bill and coming up with some verbiage. But before that, I mean, what was your passion? What sparked you to do this?
I think there's always something that's driving each of us, and this has always been a passion of mine, right? And just...
When you say this, what is this?
Just inequities, right? And seeing things that aren't right, that's always sort of been a passion of mine. And my experiences in high school really culminated to sort of bring me to this point. And in the summer of 2020, after seeing a lot of the unrest and a lot of things going on just in my neighborhood and across the country and in the world, I actually wanted to see this sort of legislation get crafted in something like this. And, you know, lo and behold, networking and talking to people, getting in contact with people led me to getting in contact with the representative, and, you know, knowing that there was something already like this in the works, and I definitely wanted to be part of this and jump in on that. And so just seeing things that aren't right, just seeing inequities in general.
So seeing things that aren't right, was there something in your schooling as you went all the way up to your senior year? And 2020 was a year all in its own, right? And filled with so many things. But what was it specifically in your education that said, hey, I have a problem here?
I think even before 2020, I think it was in 2016, in my freshman year. So during that time, I was a freshman in high school just coming in, and I had a civics class. And in that, I was just seeing a lot of things that weren't really reflective of who I was. My history wasn't being told in that class, and I felt like I wasn't being represented as a person through the course content. And then, lo and behold, I'm going and I'm doing my own kind of research on my own on Black history and on myself, really, and who I am, and trying to discover that.
So prior to this, I know the Black history courses are in school and it is part of the curriculum, but I guess it's easy to say you just didn't feel like you were represented.
Correct.
Or was the history inaccurate in some of your views? You said you did some research on your own.
Yeah, just not being represented and just not seeing figures that looked like me being taught in the curriculum, being taught in schools, in coursework, and me having to go out and do that research on my own and trying to find answers and solutions and really to try to find my identity, especially in 2016. That was a year in itself.
Ma'am, let me flip the script just a little bit, okay? Let's take this from a different perspective. We have documentation, or can I say we have information from the Department of Education that holistically as a state, there's only a 53% passing rate for English. And I think even less for mathematics. 44% for mathematics. We're not doing the best that we can. Also, COVID happened. Unfortunately, our schools, a lot of our students were displaced, and there was a socioeconomic impact to that, and especially in regards to which students excelled and which students didn't. Wilmington schools were in trouble prior to that and were making headway, but this did not help. Academically, there are issues here in the state of Delaware. Some may say, should we focus on that? Should we focus more on ensuring that those students are at least reading at level, that our high school graduates are being prepared for education, are prepared for higher education, prepared for jobs, vocational or what have you at the time of graduation? And right now, they may not be. They're working on it, but they may not be as prepared as they could. So for some that may say, was this the proper time for this bill to go through? Are we spending a lot of energy on this when we should have been spending energy on that? What do you say?
When I see myself reflected in the classroom activities and in the curriculum, I automatically start doing better because it shows me that if I can see it, I can believe it, then I can achieve it. So if I see myself reflected in the English books, if I see myself reflected in science, if I see myself reflected in math, then maybe I'll start doing a little better because it says to me, I can do this. Just yesterday, we had a young man from the north side of Wilmington who actually was chosen number 17 as a result of being in the NBA. He's now in the NBA. That young man had to overcome so much adversity, but what he did is he stayed in the classroom. He stayed in the books. And imagine what life is for him now that, and imagine what it is for our children in Wilmington, now that they can see themselves reflected in the NBA. Now that doesn't mean that everybody's going to the NBA, nor does it mean that everyone's going to the NFL. The Eagles just chose a young man from St. Elizabeth's, my alma mater, to be a part of their team. And it doesn't mean that everybody has to excel in sports, but what it does mean is, if I can see it, I can believe it, then I can achieve it. And this is the proper time because education is the great equalizer.
So is continuity of this information going to be established and maintained by the Department of Education?
The Department of Education has an RFP out right now. Good question. And what they're doing is putting together standards with the hopes that districts will, in fact, follow the standards set forth. Now, they have the option of not doing so, and it's going to take some time to get some of the other districts who may not be on board.
And there's no consequence to that option?
Well, the consequence is that your children will still be, the best way to say is, wouldn't you want your children to have knowledge than to lack knowledge?
Absolutely. I've been told a few times that things fall at the option of the districts and that the Department of Education doesn't necessarily mandate, only suggest on certain actions. So with this great bill that's happening and this information, possible curriculum development in regards to it, and then the thought that nothing really needs to be done if they don't want to, worries me.
The bill would not have been passed if I even thought that, oh my goodness, it doesn't have teeth and we're not going to be able to do what needs to be done in this moment. Everything starts with a step. The civil rights movement of the 60s, prior to you and I being alive, had they not done what they did, you and I probably would not be able to vote to this day.
Correct.
We probably would not have been able to go to college. We probably would not have been able to have access to great education. And we may not even be able to live in certain communities. Now, we're still denied housing in certain communities. It's deeded, but that's part of history. That's something that needs to be taught. So it's important that we get over ourselves, get out of our own way, and do what needs to be done for the sake of our children.
One question we continued to ask was, how will Delaware schools implement the curriculum in House Bill 198? We spoke to Dr. Darren Guido, the supervisor of instruction at Caesar Rodney School District. He wants to ensure that the school districts take their time, do their research, and learn before making curriculum decisions.
The bill is going to allow us the opportunity to have a more diverse and wide range view of in our social studies classrooms. It's going to allow us to dig a little more deeply into Black history education and what that looks like through U.S. history, world history, the books we read in our language arts classes. It's really not just a social studies initiative, but it's really trying to make Black history education a part of every student's experience in public education. I think it's going to give us that opportunity to read more literature by African-American authors. Maybe we see more African-American music in our music classes or in our performances. Maybe this gives us the opportunity to look more at the inventors and mathematicians who that we don't necessarily have in the forefront of our minds or in education currently. It's not, the students want to learn. So we are going to present materials that engage students. It's not about pitting one group against another group. It's looking at contributions of everybody. And I know in our district and in the coalition, we also want to look at the bill and the components that it's focusing on and expand that, take that same spirit of the bill and how do we include Asian Americans? How do we include Indigenous people? How do we include the LGBTQ community? You know, other marginalized groups that haven't had a prominent role in curriculum. How can we include those natural components also? Really, we're trying to be much more inclusive in our curriculum. We want the curriculum to reflect the students in the classrooms.
The most important part of Black history teaching will be the teacher, right? You can have the best curriculum possible, right? But if you don't have a teacher that can actually execute the curriculum, then the class will not go properly, right? So teacher education concerning Black history is probably the most important aspect that I see. And, you know, teacher education programs, school districts need to continuously have professional development around both the content of Black history, because when the National Museum of African American History conducted their 2015 study with teachers in Black history, they noted that very few teachers had the content knowledge to actually teach a Black history course effectively, right? So that's one part. A second part is they definitely need to not only know content, they need to know the content pedagogical knowledge that connects to Black history. And what that means is understanding the appropriate instructional practices that connect to the subject in which they're teaching, right? So teacher training is in my mind the most important aspect of it, because you can have the best curriculum, but if you don't have a teacher that's able to teach that curriculum, effectively, then the class will not make it.
One member of Patriots for Delaware, a group who was vocal around school board elections this year, backing candidates who were less than enthusiastic about changing curriculum. He told us that while not opposed to a more diverse history lesson, the group is concerned about preserving our current history.
I've spoke with many politicians up and down the state while 198 was being passed, okay? And one of the amendments that was added to 198 that garnished a lot of Republican support was the fact that it was going to be implemented at the school board level, okay? This is putting it in the hands of the local form of government to take and make sure the implementation of it is done, okay? And how to implement it is key, okay? That is our local representative, okay? Instead of a mandate coming down from the top, now our communities can now take and decide how we teach our kids.
So I think it's safe to say that the events that have occurred over the past, I guess, year or so with Black Lives Matter has brought to light several things that have just been pressed out of history. There are things that I'm sure many Americans wish would just go away. And I'm sure a lot of those people are in Patriots of Delaware. So what do you say to that?
Anyone that wants to suppress history is doomed to repeat it, okay? If you're not teaching all of history, then we're doomed to repeat that, okay? So I was taught about slavery, but I wasn't taught about all other parts of history. I wasn't taught how the slaves got here. In high school, I was not taught that. In high school, we only had to have 3 years of history. Why? We should be having 4 years of history. We should be having a constitutional class for both the federal and the state constitution. Okay, these are all things. These are all issues. I mean, we need to expand
So a
on
more
our history.
comprehensive view of history for all students.
Yes.
But a lot of that history does have arms in it that deal directly with race in this country.
Absolutely.
And your organization is okay with that?
We're fine with that.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we're fine with that. That part we have no problem with. The part that we have a problem with is if that's all you're going to teach. And unfortunately, there has been, and maybe it just might be claptrap rhetoric, okay? You never know. There's a lot of propaganda floating around. But what a lot of people have been told is that that is going to be the main focus of American history, which will divide our people.
So let's speak about the division. Your organization has worries in regards to division, not only in the country, but within the state. Why do you feel that this will divide our country?
Racism, if you look in history, has always divided our country, okay? And look, I'll tell you what, I grew up in a small town, and my parents, I had friends right down the street, African Americans. The peanut butter and jelly sandwich tasted the same at their house as it did at my house.
What is the responsibility of the school districts to ensure that this information is getting passed down to the children and their teachers are being well equipped to teach this for the upcoming school year?
Outstanding question. The Department of Education, each district has local control. And my friends who live in larger jurisdictions, they kind of look at me like, how do you have 19 school districts in a state the size of Delaware? And the New York City has one school district for all of New York City. Same with Philadelphia. Yet, and they have more people than we have, yet we have 19 school districts. So to answer your question, there will be local control. And part of that is the Department of Education each district will need to report to the Department of Education, who will then report to the governor, letting them know that they have infused Black history into the state's curriculum. And we're talking about adding Black history as it pertains to science. Had it not been for the Black women who worked with NASA when they were denied the opportunity to do so, but they kept pushing forward, some of our affluent billionaires would not be going into space right now. Black women made it such that that could happen. That's history. That's a part of the history that needs to be taught.
And was that not being taught now?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. And I don't even know what the fear is. Here's the biggest issue. When you learn, and when I learned about other people's history, it helped me gain an appreciation for who they are. I represent Little Italy. I have such an appreciation for the Italian culture because I grew up around it. I went to St. Elizabeth's all 12 years. I have an appreciation for Polish and Irish culture because I grew up around it, learning about their culture. I'm not going to disparage them because they have Irish pride, Italian pride, or Polish pride. I shouldn't be disparaged for having Black pride. And that's what we need to start teaching. It needs to be a situation where there's an appreciation for others' differences. And that's the purpose of this legislation.